the U.S. government's involvement in the drug trade have often been labeled conspiracy theories, despite being reported by award-winning journalists and academics who investigated the claims, as well as former DEA, CIA, military, and police who witnessed, oversaw, or took part in the crimes.
Today, you're going to meet several people who are former employees of our United States government, people who have looked at this over years, who will say, whether it was a conspiracy or not, they don't want to talk about it. But did the CIA know that drugs were coming into the United States of America and help it get here? The answer to the question is yes.
Absolutely.
Does the CIA do this on a regular basis? The answer to the question is?
Absolutely. The CIA is the kingpin, the Don.
So you're saying that the CIA is the kingpin of the head of the United States Mafia?
Look, I've put thousands of people in jail. Thousands. DEA gave a British writer once a figure of 3,000. It was a lot more than that. I've never failed in putting a case before court, conspiracy cases, undercover cases. I've never lost a case.
The government's ability and willingness to spy on people globally was similarly considered a conspiracy theory, until Edward Snowden recently disclosed this violation to the world. Also, like current whistleblowers, including Snowden and Bradley Manning, who are humiliated by the press and, in Manning's case, tortured in a U.S. prison before being convicted of 19 charges. Courageous individuals who speak out about the U.S. government's role in smuggling drugs and supporting drug lords are largely ridiculed and ignored. This so-called conspiracy theory has been discussed and documented for decades, yet the phony drug war persists. In 1993, Robert Bonner, former head of the DEA, told CBS News the CIA imports drugs into the United States.
The head of the DEA at the time, Robert Bonner, said that a ton of pure cocaine worth hundreds of millions of dollars had been smuggled into the United States. And he blamed the CIA, saying the agency had joined the Venezuelan National Guard in drug smuggling.
Let me understand what you're saying. A ton of cocaine was smuggled into the United States of America by the Venezuelan National Guard?
Well,
in cooperation with the CIA?
That's exactly what appears to have happened.
As a response to Bonner's admission, Frederick Hitz, the CIA's Inspector General, told a congressional committee that the CIA has a history of working with drug dealers. In fact, Hitz said the agency secured a waiver from the Department of Justice in the 1980s, allowing them to conduct drug smuggling activities. According to Alfred McCoy, historian and author, the U.S. government's management of the drug trade can be traced to World War II. He claims the CIA and other intelligence agencies facilitated the establishment of new hubs for opium production, heroin refining, and drug distribution in Southeast Asia after the suppression of the American and Turkish heroin trades. This Asian heroin haven became known as the Golden Triangle. McCoy says American involvement in the worldwide drug trade had gone far beyond coincidental complicity. Embassies had covered up involvement by client governments, CIA contract airlines had carried opium, and individual CIA agents had winked at the opium traffic. As an indirect consequence of American involvement in the Golden Triangle until 1972, opium production steadily increased. Southeast Asia's Golden Triangle grew 70% of the world's illicit opium, supplied an estimated 30% of America's heroin, and was capable of supplying the United States with unlimited quantities of heroin for generations to come. He claims the CIA does not typically handle drugs, however. Instead, they provide transport, arms, and political protection to drug lord allies. More famously, in 1986, the Iran-Contra affair revealed that CIA and Contra forces smuggled drugs and weapons to fund combat operations.
There are a lot of questions about who really was involved and why.
2 men in jail in Miami awaiting trial, an air charter company owner and one of his pilots, say some Contras sold drugs for weapons. The pilot, Gary Betzner, is a confessed, convicted drug smuggler. In a statement, he said he made 3 drug deliveries for men his boss told him were Contra officers, backed by U.S. agents.
I do not deny that as a pilot I smuggle my share of illegal substance, but by the same token I also smuggle my share of weapons in exchange for those illegal substances, with the full knowledge and assistance of both the DEA and CIA.
Once the drugs were in the United States, the U.S. government propped up drug dealers like Ricky Ross, aka Freeway Rick, a Southern California dealer, to sell the goods. Ross was running a massive operation the Los Angeles Times called the Walmart of crack dealing.
Ricky Ross is right now facing a life sentence, but he says he deserves to be a free man. Why? Because he says the CIA used him as a pawn to sell drugs to help fund the secret war in Nicaragua. Take a look at this tape.
If it was good for them to sell drugs, then it should have been good for me to sell drugs. The money
from the drugs went to buy guns for the Contras.
Ricky Ross was selling cocaine to the point of making $3 to $4 million a day. He sold so much cocaine, it hurt his fingers to count the money. Not only in Los Angeles, but in Cincinnati, in St. Louis, all the way across America. So some can say, and this is the reason why people are so angry at you in your article, is that Ricky Ross, the dope dealer, was supplied by the CIA because Blandone was an operative for the CIA, correct?
Blandone and Meneses were working for an army that was a wholly owned subsidiary of the CIA. They were meeting with CIA agents. Blandone, and this came out in court. I mean, Danilo Blandone is now a government witness. He works for the Drug Enforcement Administration, and we've paid him, I don't know, $166,000 over the last 18 months because he's such a good informant. So they put him on the witness stand in Ricky Ross's case, and he testified that in 1981, he went to Honduras, he met with the commander, the military commander of the CIA's army, and he was instructed to go raise money in California for this Contra army. And he was told that the ends justified the means.
And those ends being sell cocaine if you have to.
Well, look, he was in the room with the Nicaraguan representative of the Cali cartel, Mr. Meneses, and he was in the room with a government marketing expert named Danilo Blandone. Now, if they weren't talking about selling cocaine, I don't know what they were talking about.
In 1996, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Gary Webb wrote, "For the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Bloods street gangs of Los Angeles and funneled millions in drug profits to a Latin American guerrilla army run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency."
The government reaction was no reaction. And this, I believe, was a very careful strategy because nobody was going to believe the government if they came out and said we didn't do it. The proof was fairly overwhelming since we had all these government documents showing that it had happened. So what happened was they let the so-called liberal press speak for them. And they had the national security reporters at the Washington Post, who coincidentally used to work for the CIA, write stories saying it doesn't mean anything.
The U.S. government's control of the drug trade is also apparent in Afghanistan, where according to the United Nations Drug Control Program, opium cultivation increased 657% in 2002, which was shortly after the NATO occupation began. Afghanistan is currently the largest opium producer, accounting for 70% of the world's heroin supply last year. Nearly 900 tons of opium and 375 tons of heroin are trafficked from Afghanistan annually. Moreover, the number of people dying from heroin overdoses in NATO countries is actually higher than the number of soldiers killed in Afghanistan, which does not stop U.S. military members from guarding the opium fields.
In western Kandahar, poppy farmers score, till, harvest their crop, and the Americans do nothing to stop them. U.S. soldiers greet farmers.
Can you show me which poppy field is yours?
They commiserate with farmers having a bad harvest.
Tell them I'm very sorry for this field this year, and hopefully there's a better harvest next year.
And in one case, they even paid a farmer $1,000 after U.S. and Afghan special forces burned his crop.
If you can come down to the base on my next visit, I'll make a payment.
This is controversial. The opium trade is the Taliban's main source of funding.
Around here, this poppy isn't only a plant, it's the very basis of the economy here. Poppy grows everywhere in this area, and most of the farmers base their entire income for the entire season on this harvest.
And that's why soldiers ignore and encourage the farmers. If the U.S. burned their crop, farmers would blame the U.S. for their poverty and turn toward the Taliban.
Last year, a spokesman for the Chihuahua state government in Mexico told Al Jazeera the U.S. government does not fight drug traffickers, but merely manages the drug trade. His comment came after the Fast and Furious scandal, where the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms provided Mexican drug gangs with 1,700 guns, including the AK-47 used in 2010 to kill Brian Terry, an American Customs and Border Protection agent.
The federal agency is now retaliating by firing the agent who blew the whistle on the mission that allowed thousands of guns to get into the hands of Mexican drug lords. That's known as Fast and Furious. Some of those weapons, 2 of them in fact, were found at the scene when Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was gunned down in December of last year. Now, the ATF whistleblower, Vince Cefalu, joins me now. Also joining us right now is Congressman Darrell Issa. He is the chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, who's led these hearings into this investigation of Operation Fast and Furious. The badge was being taken away, and your gun was taken away as well, correct?
That's correct. When I challenged it to them, they said that they were doing just what the attorneys had told them to do, which is the standard protocol anymore for decisions within this bureau.
And what did they say was the reason that they were taking away your badge after 24 years and many years of exemplary reports of your work at ATF?
The basic underpinning was lack of candor, which is totally fabricated.
This light green right here, that is the territory of the Sinaloa cartel. Look, if you want to understand Mexico's drug war, then you have to understand how the Sinaloa cartel works. A man by the name of Joaquin Guzman, also known as Chapo Guzman, is the head of this cartel. In 2001, Guzman was being held in a Mexican prison. He actually escaped from that prison in a laundry truck. He went back and took control of the Sinaloa cartel. And when Guzman did, he began a war with all these other cartels across Mexico. The goal here, the attempt, was to create one super cartel by wiping out all of the competition. It has been long believed in Mexico that Joaquin Chapo Guzman got a lot of help. And that is the war that has been fought in Mexico heavily since 2006. So back to the Fast and Furious allegations here. The man making those claims, again, Zambata Nebla, is a close associate of Chapo Guzman and the Sinaloa cartel's logistics coordinator. Zambata Nebla claims that under a divide and conquer strategy, the U.S. helped finance and arm the Sinaloa cartel through Operation Fast and Furious in exchange for information that allowed the DEA, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and other federal agencies to take down rival drug cartels. The Sinaloa cartel was allegedly permitted to traffic massive amounts of drugs across the U.S. from 2004 to 2009, during both Fast and Furious and the Bush-era gun-running operations, as long as the intel kept coming. And there is more. Based on the alleged agreement, the Sinaloa cartel, under the leadership of the defendant's father, Ismael Zambata Nebla, and Chapo Guzman, were given carte blanche to continue smuggling tons of illicit drugs into Chicago and the rest of the United States. They were also protected by the United States government from arrest and prosecution in return for providing information against rival cartels, which helped Mexican and United States authorities capture or kill thousands of rival cartel members. States of Motion filed for discovery in United States District Court by Zambata Nebla's attorney in July of 2011.
Furthermore, in 2004, the Sinaloa cartel was found to be laundering money through one of the U.S.'s largest banks, Wachovia, which is now part of Wells Fargo. In 2010, the bank settled in court, paying $110 million in forfeiture for allowing transactions connected to drug smuggling and $50 million for failing to monitor funds used to traffic 22 tons of cocaine. More importantly, Wachovia failed to apply proper anti-laundering regulations to $378.4 billion transferred to Mexican accounts. In the end, the total fine was less than 2% of the bank's $12.3 billion profits in 2009.
Drug smugglers in Mexico City wired $300,000 from a currency exchange to a Wachovia branch in Miami. Then they wired money from that branch to a Bank of America branch in Oklahoma City. The money was used to buy a DC-9, which then flew from St. Petersburg, Florida, to Caracas. The plane then transported 5.7 tons of cocaine, valued at about $100 million, to Mexico. There, the crew was arrested. Wachovia has admitted it didn't do enough to spot illicit funds while handling $378 billion from Mexican currency exchange firms over a 3-year period. Wells Fargo, Wachovia's new owner.
Wells Fargo stock increased 1% on the week of the court settlement. Governments and corporations continue to run wild, disregarding the law and democracy globally, yet most people do not care. According to Shane and Thompson, the DEA currently has 87 offices in 63 different countries and close partnerships with governments that keep the CIA at arm's length. It seems the powers that be have no intention of letting popular opinion about drugs, especially cannabis, get in the way of their profitable global schemes.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.